On 24th October 1889, Sir Henry Parkes, Premier of New South Wales, gave a speech in the small New South Wales town of Tenterfield. The speech contained ideas that caught the Australian public's attention and to a large degree convinced them of the need to federate. What follows is a very average reading of the key parts of that speech.
The great question we have to consider is whether the time has not now arisen for the creation of this Australian continent, of an Australian government and an Australian parliament. To make myself as plain as possible, Australia has a population of 3.5 million, and the American people numbered only between 3 and 4 million when they formed their great Commonwealth of the United States. The numbers are about the same. Surely what the Americans have done by war, because the Americans had a big war to become, one whole country independent of England. Surely what the Americans have done by war, Australia can bring about in peace. Believing that I do, that it is essential to preserve the security and integrity of these colonies, the Australian colonies, then the whole of our forces should be amalgamated into one great federal army. Seeing no other means of obtaining these ends, it seems to me that the time is close at hand when we ought to set about creating this great national government for Australia. This subject brings us face to face with another subject. We have now from South Australia to Queensland a stretch of about 2,000 miles of railways. And if the 4 colonies could only combine to adopt a uniform gauge, that means the same type of train track, it would be an immense advantage in the movement of troops. So these are the 2 great national questions which I wish to lay before you. One great federal army and a nationwide uniform gauge railway line. And 3, 2, 1, 0. Hello, here we are. We're looking at key events or people that led to Australia federating, or the Federation of Australia in 1901. And we're going to start off with a person. One key person, and that person is Sir Henry Parkes. And here's his key contribution. Summarised, here it comes. Sir Henry Parkes gave the Tenterfield Oration, which convinced the people, not even just the politicians, the people, which convinced the people that federation should happen. Mr. Parkes, Sir Henry Parkes, worked towards federation for a large part of his life. So brief history lesson. Henry Parkes was an Australian politician, been in Australia early in the 1800s, worked as a politician in Australia, was very keen to see all the colonies come together as one nation. His key reasons for this was so that Australia could have a unified defence against international threats, and believe you me, there was a World War after that, and World War II as well, in which Australia needed to be unified. And also he wanted, and this is a bit funny, he wanted the states to agree on a common railway system, because when trains went across borders, they actually used to have to change tracks, or even different trains, because the tracks were different every state or colony. So Mr. Parkes was concerned that would make troop movement around the country entirely impractical. So we should federate one unified army that could be moved around the country on one common set of train tracks. Now, Mr. Henry Parkes gave the Tenterfield Oration, which largely dealt with the idea of one common army which could be moved around the country on common train tracks to defend against the rest of the world. and this caught the public's imagination. A sad note, he never lived to see actual federation occur. He died before Australia federated. Nevertheless, he is known as the father of federation. And 3, 2, 1, right, and we're back, and we are looking at really 3 key events or reasons or people involved in the lead up to Australia's decision to federate. Now, number 1 was we looked at the Tenterfield Oration by Sir Henry Parkes. Now we're looking at number 2, and I think number 2 might be defined as probably the threat of invasion. And when we talk about invasion, we talk about one country invading another country, and of course that happens even today, and it certainly happened a lot more, let's say 200, 100 years ago. Now, there's really 2 key platforms with regard to the threat of invasion, and Henry Parkes referenced them both, I believe, in his Tenterfield Oration. Let's look at A and B. Let's look at both platforms with regards to invasion of Australia as to why we might have federated. Right, first of all, let's call it A. If one country is going to attack Australia, whoever they are, and countries have tried to attack Australia and invade Australia, Australia would benefit from a unified, cohesive federal defence force. That means one army, one navy, one air force, not 5 little armies or 5 little navies or 5 little air forces scattered at various points, acting independently across the country. It just would not form a united front against any sort of serious invasion. And of course, you recall that in World War II, we were actually invaded. Japanese planes and Japanese submarines actually came into, I think, in Northern Territory and into Sydney Harbour. So the threat of invasion in Australia is a real thing, and it has, to a very small degree, happened. So one reason to unify Australia as one country as opposed to various separate colonies would mean we would have one army, we would have one air force, we would have one navy, and these groups could act collectively as one big brute force to defend Australia. And they have, and it has been effective. We've been quite an effective country in wars. Of course, we participated in the First World War, and we participated in the Second World War, and we participated as the Australian Army, or the Australian Air Force, or the Australian Navy. 3, okay? Not as the New South Wales Army or whatnot, okay? The take-home point is there, guys, a united, cohesive federal defence force is probably essential to defending Australia. Part B of this point, I think, is best defined as train tracks, and it's a fairly obvious one. It might seem a bit funny, but it's got a lot to do with how we might defend Australia, or how we would have defended Australia effectively, around the 1880s, around the 1900s, and that is train tracks, and they needed to be the same gauge, the same type of train track across all the colonies to ensure rapid and effective troop movements. So it's no good trying to ferry the New South Wales troops into Queensland because the army of the other nation is attacking us in Queensland, and then we can't get the New South Wales troops into Queensland because they've got to literally change trains because the tracks are different in Queensland. It just gets ridiculous. You can't operate as an effective army across the nation if you're having to change train tracks at every state or colony. Now, it's not just the military, but these things often start off with the military. Innovations are often created as a defence and then they're applied to the general public. For example, the internet, which we all use now, started with the American military. It's the same for train tracks. Train tracks were good for a united, cohesive federal defence force. But of course, everybody having the same tracks is great for all Australians, because I can now travel to Western Australia all the way across Australia, pretty much on the one train. So there's reason 2. This is a reason or an event why that has led up to federation. And 3, 2, 1, here we are. Reason number 3, or a key event or person associated with the lead up to federation. Well, we can't leave out the event of federation itself. The 1st of January 1901, federation. A big day for Australia. And here we go. The Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act proclaimed 1st of January 1901, Centennial Park in Sydney. Great, just where we are actually. The Constitution, of course, isn't the laws of Australia, rather it's the laws with regard to how Australia is going to operate. So that means, it'll have a Senate, it'll have a House of Reps. The political party with the most members in the House of Reps gets to choose the Prime Minister. All those rules are in the Constitution, and the Constitution was drafted earlier, I think, a couple of years earlier, actually, in the United Kingdom. I'm wrong, not a couple of years earlier, a few months earlier in the United Kingdom, under the Queen, but it was proclaimed on the 1st of January 1901 in Sydney, Centennial Park. Maybe you've even been to Centennial Park, and this is where it all happened. This is where Australia was born. And of course, don't forget, Sir Edmund Barton was sworn in as Australia's first Prime Minister. Okay. Now I'm going to rub this out, so if you haven't got it down, you should get it down, because it's important and great stuff, even if I say so myself. Now, the activation of the Constitution was a super big deal for Australia, because it effectively decided how Australia would be organised or run, and it goes a little bit like this. The Constitution activated a Senate, which we know as the upper house, and they're elected. And the House of Representatives, which we also know as the lower house, and they're also elected. And this is a federal Senate, guys, a Senate for all of Australia. And this is a federal House of Representatives, a House of Representatives for all of Australia. It also activated a Governor-General who would effectively represent the Queen in Australia. He or she is the Queen's spokesperson, and they have certain powers, including deposing Prime Ministers if they're not doing their job well enough. Also, it activated a High Court to make the big legal decisions in Australia. And, very importantly, going into our next part of this video, actually, it divided powers between state and federal governments. Because federal governments look after some aspects of Australia, and state governments look after other aspects of Australia. Okay, so this has been three big events, people or reasons, I guess, leading up to, and I would say, I guess, including federation. But the reason I'm happy to include federation as an important event is, well, because that's what this is all about. And we're actually in federation right now. Federation hasn't finished. You live federation every day. I hope that's been an inspiring end to this lesson series. Okay, thanks for listening. Cheers.